This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Here's your host, Brandon Contes.
All righty, welcome to episode 99 of the Awful Announcing Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Contes, and this week we are joined by the host of Fox NFL Sunday, the co-host of Good Day New York, and Fox's lead play-by-play voice for the UFL. He is Curt Menefee. Curt, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It is NFL schedule release week. We're recording this about a few hours or so before the schedules are released. But I have to at least ask, can a network ever have too many Dallas Cowboys games?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I appreciate it, Brandon. I don't know if I should be honored by 99 or disappointed I'm not 100. You know, it's the last before you flip over the odometer, I think. So, no. I look, win or lose, people may say they hate it that the Cowboys are on television so much, but the reason they are is because win or lose, people watch them. You know, they're that franchise. And I don't know if there's another in sports that's like that anymore. People used to talk about the Yankees or the Lakers. I think some of that hatred watching has waned everywhere except the NFL. I think people still watch the Cowboys to see them win or to see them lose. And that doesn't matter what their record is. So The answer is no.
And I think it certainly changes with the Yankees or the Lakers, just the fact that they have so many games in a season. So you can almost like the novelty of seeing the Lakers lose, if they're losing 50 games in a season, it does start to wear off. Whereas the Cowboys with just 17 games, like that novelty does not wear off in a season.
Right. No, I think you're right.
Do you pay much attention to the schedule release to see what games Fox is going to have? Like, does it matter much? I mean, obviously it doesn't really change your travel too much.
Right. It doesn't change our travel too much because we do, almost all the shows during the regular season out of the studio in LA. Yes, I pay attention to it. And the reason is you always want to see where the big games are.
Yeah.
Who do you have playing on Thanksgiving? You're going to be in Detroit this year, in Dallas next year, since we alternate with CBS. But, who's the opponent? Also, the doubleheader weekends you have, do you have a big matchup? Do you have Eagles, Cowboys, Commanders, Cowboys, or, do you have one of those Baltimore, San Francisco games? Something that's going to attract people other than just being a normal Sunday that, okay, it's a nice matchup. But you also have to keep in mind that the schedule comes out and we're in May. And all these games that you look at, especially when you get to November, December, that you think may be great on the schedule. And again, you don't wish anything bad to happen to anybody, but I think just 2 years ago, the Aaron Rodgers situation was a prime example. Everybody had loaded up on the Jets, 4 plays in the season. He's done, and that's a team nobody wants to see the rest of the season. So you watch it, but you watch it with an eye knowing that the schedule and the results will change. But you are interested just to see where the big games are and which ones you have. And also, in all honesty, you keep an eye on and see what CBS has, what ESPN has, what NBC has for the Sunday night games, and just go, wow, that's one that got away. I wish we had that one.
Do you pay attention to TV ratings? Like, are you checking back to see how
I don't.
Fox and no?
I don't. Look, this is my 20th season hosting Fox NFL Sunday, and I've been fortunate enough. I mean, we've been the number one network every single year, even before I got there. So this will be 32 years of Fox NFL Sunday, and the previous 31 has been number one every year. So I think, and I don't mean to sound conceited, but I think there's a luxury when you're number one that you don't have to look around and see what the numbers are or those kinds of things. If the numbers are extraordinarily high, it's the most watched, obviously the Super Bowl or championship game or most watched Sunday in 5 years, those kinds of things. The network lets us know. But on a week-to-week basis, we don't talk about it at all because, we just feel like we put the product out. We've been blessed that people seem to gravitate towards it and like it. And you just kind of keep trying to do the same thing over and over.
What has made the show so successful for so long?
I think it's that people see that we're genuinely friends. I think a lot of shows and again, not criticizing anybody in particular, but, you get people you see they're kind of thrown together on whatever day of the week their show is, whether it's football, basketball, or baseball, or hockey. And you go, okay, how well do those guys really know one another? Are they fake laughing? Are they yucking it up? I mean, I think people understand not only because of the years we've been together, but that, we're all genuinely friends. I always tell people Jake Laser was best man in my wedding. I've known Michael Strahan since his second year in the league, and person he was with at the time tried to set me up with her sister. You know, I mean, like we've known these kinds of things. I knew Jimmy, who, you know, he's retiring now, but when he was the coach of the Dallas Cowboys, and we spend time in the off season together. We were just all together. I'm trying to think, the end of April, so the draft weekend. So, you know, we spend time, our families know one another, and I think that comes across on the air because it does feel like, I hope, like a bunch of guys who are just friends who are doing the same thing that they do on Saturdays when they watch college football, with the exception of no swear words and no adult beverages. You know, I think that's the only difference. Otherwise, we're the same guys, and I think that translates because I believe that people can sense those kinds of things. They may not know it, or they may not know that's the reason, but I think they can sense chemistry.
Yep. Yeah, it's definitely it's the personalities, it's the chemistry, and it's also the continuity. Like for 30 years, fans knew it was going to be
right.
Howie, Terry, and Jimmy at noon on Fox. CBS hasn't had that type of continuity. How do you keep that now? How do you keep that same feeling with Jimmy retiring?
You know, I think that we've been, again, fortunate enough to know that, I'm trying to think, since the COVID year, Jimmy started splitting his time and not coming into the studio in Los Angeles every single week. And so he's the doubleheader weekends. And I think most of the people that listen to this podcast understand the difference between doubleheaders and single headers. On the doubleheader weekends, Jimmy would come in. And when it was a single header, we just had, you know, one big game on Sunday. Jimmy would stay down in Florida and do the show. And for a while, he would do it via Zoom. And then, it'll be 3 years ago now, we started having Gronk come in on those weekends. So it was either Jimmy or Gronk in that chair, depending on whether it was a doubleheader or a single header. And so now we just kind of transition a little bit. So I think that helps because, one, the audience is used to Gronk being with us. Two, Gronk is used to being with us. And three, we're used to being with Gronk. So it's not like you're bringing in a brand new face. I don't think that they've announced exactly how much he's going to be working, if it's going to be more, if it's going to be the same or whatever. But I think the transition is going to be smoother because it's a familiar face and somebody that we've all worked together with. Again, I just saw Gronk Monday. No, I saw Gronk. I saw Michael. I saw Brady. You know what I mean? So it goes back to kind of, it's a group of people that we're all together quite frequently. And I think that helps.
When did you learn Jimmy was retiring?
That's a good question because 2 seasons ago, Jimmy told us he was retiring and we had him a going away dinner. And we're like, oh, we're going to miss you, you know, hey, but it's time, you know, I want to spend more time fishing and at home. And then that was it at the end of January because we didn't have the Super Bowl, right at the NFC Championship game. And then in April, he's like, well, guys, I'm coming back. And we're like, what the hell? You know, we spent money. We had a good time doing all this, but obviously we loved having him back. And so he came back 2 more years. So I don't think that we were surprised. I mean, look, Jimmy is as energetic, as focused as anybody I know at the age of 81, but he's also 81. And at some point you go, you're not doing this forever. He's flying from the Florida Keys each and every week. And so when he would come out, he and I and Terry mostly would watch college football together on Saturdays at the hotel that we stayed at in Los Angeles. And it was different this year than it has been in years past, because in the past couple of years, he would get to the end of the year and, you know, and we're all tired. And again, with the age difference, I think and the travel and all that stuff, it hit him maybe a little bit more. And so you understood it then. This year, it was October-ish, November, that he started talking about, you know what, I'm thinking that this is it. So it was not an official goodbye then. It wasn't even official until after the Super Bowl. I know when we did the big AI retrospective on his career, a lot of people were wondering, is that it? That's one of the reasons why I asked him on the air. And he, you know, didn't want to make a commitment at that time because he said he didn't want to do like he did before, where you say it and then you change your mind. But I was not surprised, just based off of, you know, again, sitting around on Saturdays and shooting the crap with him, that this time he was for real.
Do you have a most memorable moment with Jimmy?
Yeah, I think there's no question. To me, I think it's the most memorable moment in the history of Fox Sports was when he learned that he was going in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. You know, that happened on a Saturday playoff game. It was the Seahawks and Packers. And Jimmy had no idea, honest to goodness, that David Baker from the Hall of Fame at the time was going to come on and announce that he was going in. And I've told the story before. Jimmy had assumed that he was not going in that year. He was a finalist. And David Baker had been on CBS's pregame show on Saturday for their playoff game and announced that Bill Cowher was going in. We had our pregame show on Sunday for the playoff game, and David Baker didn't come in. And so Jimmy just assumed, oh, it didn't happen on the pregame show, I'm not going on. Well, I knew that he was. I knew our CEO, Eric Shanks, Bill Richards, who was our producer, and we were the only people that knew. They didn't tell directors, floor crew, anybody else. So I had to try to keep the secret the rest of the day without giving away anything, when your buddy's feeling bad because he's not going in. So when we started the halftime show, and first thing I asked Jimmy a question because I wanted him to face me so that he would be looking directly at the door where David Baker would come in. And then David Baker walked in and Jimmy lost his breath. He pulled out his what do you call it, for nebulizer, because he has asthma. And we thought he was going to pass out. But I think that's the greatest single moment, because I think you saw the camaraderie that we all have and how emotional the guys were, all of us, because we knew how much it meant to Jimmy, even though he tries to pretend he's a gruff, tough old guy and these kind of things don't matter. We knew how much it meant to him. They had Troy and Joe were still at Fox at the time. They had them stay and watch the halftime show. Again, they didn't know what it was because they wanted to get Troy's reaction. And they focused the camera on them and just said, hey, just watch the halftime show. And so they didn't know. And you see the tears with Troy because he understands it. Yeah. And I think that encapsulated basically, in my mind, everything that Fox NFL Sunday and Fox Sports stands for, in the camaraderie that exists among everybody that works together. I think it came out in that one moment.
How do you balance kind of keeping the show on track and in order, and also letting all the camaraderie and the chemistry and the hijinks still shine?
I hate to keep going back to this, but I do think it's the camaraderie and it's the mutual respect. Part of what I think makes us successful is nobody worries that someone else is trying to outshine them. Yeah. I know down in Australia, New Zealand, they have what they call tall poppy syndrome, where apparently poppies, the flowers, if one grows too tall, the others kill the root so that no poppy is taller than the others. And I think we see that quite a bit in our profession, that a lot of people worry about other people that they're on a show with outshining them or becoming a bigger star. And our show, we don't have that. So I think it makes it easy that when, look, we need to move on, and I give Howie a look or Michael a look, or sometimes you'll see me, I'll grab Terry's hand or some nonverbal gesture. And sometimes you have to interrupt, but no one feels like they're being stepped on or they're being cheated. And also part of my job as host is, okay, you know what? Michael hasn't been involved for a while. Let me make sure he gets involved the next opening, and he becomes the first guy that I talk to instead of it being Howie or Terry. So I think that is part of it, but it goes back to just respect for one another, the camaraderie and the friendship, because nobody worries about it. If they don't get to say anything in a full segment, trust me, they are totally fine.
Terry Bradshaw is 76 years old. How much longer do you think he could be doing it for?
Look, you have to ask him, but I think Terry is one of those guys you're going to have to drag out of the studio. I mean, he loves doing it. People love watching him. He's still doing the shows in Branson, Missouri, and all those. He's doing those because America loves him. And you see someone that you mentioned it earlier, has been a part of your home for 30 plus years. I don't think that there's any reason for him to retire anytime soon. And I don't think he is. I don't think that's even on his radar. He's not like Jimmy, where Jimmy kind of hints and year after year. That's not TB, and I don't suspect anything's going to change with him. And I'd love to have him there until the day they drag him out.
What was it like replacing James Brown when he went to CBS?
It was, again, it was 20 years ago now. It's amazing how time flies. 20 seasons ago, 2006. And, I had been doing games on, the fourth or fifth crew, and we know how that goes. I started in 97 doing NFL Europe and started doing NFL games for Fox in 98. So from 98 to 2006. And so when JB left, they were going to have auditions and bring, a bunch of us in to audition and work with Terry and the guys on just seeing how the chemistry worked, et cetera. And two things. One, when I first heard about it, I was on vacation in New Zealand. And I can remember David Hill was there at the time. And I emailed and said, hey, I want to be included in this, please. He's like, don't worry about it. Enjoy your vacation. We'll do it when you get back. And they waited. And I'm not saying they made everybody wait, but they waited until the weekend I was back. And that's when all the auditions happened. So I was able to do that. And I felt that was, one, a positive sign. And secondly, Bradshaw went to bat for me after the auditions, I know, and said, hey, let's stop messing around. This is the guy we want. So when you have that backing, I think that certainly goes a long way. And then going into the audition, even beforehand, having been there doing games at that point, 9-10 years, I knew JB a bit. I actually knew him a bit before I went to Fox Sports, and he could not have been more gracious in helping me as I was going through the audition and said, hey, look, the producer, again, at the time, Scott Ackerson, I keep saying at the time, we've only had one change in everything, one change in CEO, one change in producer. But anyway, he said, hey, your producer, Scott Ackerson, when you do the scoreboards, he likes them done in 4 seconds. And then with Terry, sometimes this is how you have to set him up. And so I went in with almost a cheat sheet, I felt. And then after coming out, having TB say, hey, let's stop messing around. This is the guy you want. I think that made me feel pretty much assured. But again, that was the end of April. And we go through May and June. And I'm like, fuck, they haven't said anything. What are they waiting for? And they called me the weekend before the 4th of July, David Hill, and said, hey, I just want you to know we're going to make an announcement on Monday. And it's going to be you and Joe Buck. And that was the road year. We're going to take the show on the road. Joe will do the first 45 minutes. You'll do the last 15 minutes. You'll do the halftimes. And then we'll figure out postgame. And I'm like, okay. But again, I'm going from being the 4th or 5th crew. I am not complaining. I am happy. So I asked David, I go, okay, David, now that I'm going to do this gig, you've been number one for 12 years. What's your advice to me? His exact words to me were, don't fuck it up. And once he said that, I knew what the mission was. Don't screw it up, because anything that changed, it was going to be blamed on me. And that's how I looked at it. So I think there was a little bit of pressure being the new guy, obviously, with an established crew that had been together for a dozen years, that it set the standard that was, not only number one in the ratings, but that changed the way pregame shows were done. Nobody did an hour pregame show before Fox NFL Sunday. And I know that's hard for a lot of people to believe, but it was a 30-minute show and that was it. And so many things of the entertainment aspect of it and all of it changed. So I felt a bit of pressure when I went there going, okay, I can't screw this up, because if we're not number one anymore, the one change has been the host, and I'm the guy that they would look at. But those guys, again, they alleviated the pressure. I think by being on the road that first year, it brought us closer. It made it happen sooner. It's probably the way to say it. You're going to dinner with guys on the road. You're playing cards with guys on the road. You're having drinks with guys on the road. And, those types of things accelerate relationships much more so than just kind of showing up on a weekend and getting together in the studio.
And how did it go from splitting the hosting role with Joe Buck to then you just kind of taking that full time?
So that was in 2006 was that road year, and we split it. And they decided in 2007 that they wanted to move it back to the studio and one host. I don't know, whose decision that was. David Hill was obviously in charge at that time. And at that point, it was kind of going back and forth, or at least the way it was told to me. Either I would be the host and Joe would go back to doing games with Troy as the number one guy, or Joe would be the host and I would go back and be the number two play-by-play guy at Fox. I wouldn't get the number one gig, but I get the number two gig. And so it was just kind of hung in the balance for a little while. And I remember it's another similar situation. I'm usually a happy-go-lucky guy, but your life is kind of hanging in the balance, because there's a big difference between doing games and being in the studio. And I can remember it, I don't know, maybe been a week, after they had told us that, but you want things to happen right away. And I was sitting at home and I was just like, God, same thing. I'm not hearing anything. If I'm not hearing anything, it's probably not a good thing. And it's amazing how miracles work sometimes. The phone rings and it was Scott Ackerson. It was kind of a similar thing that, hey, we're going to make an announcement next week. I just want you to go out, have a good time with your wife, enjoy the weekend. And, you're going to be the guy starting next year full-time in the studio. And that's how the decision at least was shared with me.
What was your relationship with Joe like at the time? Like, did you reach out to Joe Buck and see, does he want the full-time hosting gig, or did he want to be the number one guy with Aikman?
No. I didn't. Because I knew Joe, and obviously by being on the road and got to know him even better that year. Yeah. And I've always had a good relationship with him. But to me, it's kind of awkward if you're both, quote unquote, competing for the same gig, to kind of discuss it. Let the powers that be make that decision and let it not change your relationship. And that's how I looked at it. And I've been close with Joe ever since. I see him, I'm in Santa Barbara now, and he'll get there at times during the off season because Troy has a place there. And so we'll see each other out there, and played golf with him in St. Louis last summer. So, the relationship has continued. But back then, I think it was just a matter of, at least for me, it was just let the decision makers make the decision, and that way it doesn't affect our friendship.
In media, is there more pressure building a show from the ground up or joining a highly successful show and needing to kind of maintain that success?
More pressure with the latter, I think, because as I said earlier, it's already established.
Yeah.
And so the change is you. So if it doesn't work, then, okay, well, we know where to point the finger. So I think there's more pressure on that. But again, I was with the right people that helped alleviate some of that after a while. I think if you do something you're starting from the ground up, there's no pressure because there's no expectation. People don't know if it's going to succeed or not. And it could have the greatest group of people working on it. And we've all seen things just for whatever reason, timing, outlet, whatever, it just doesn't work. So I think when you start something from scratch, there's zero pressure because the whole world's your oyster.
How different is hosting Fox NFL Sunday from doing Good Day New York?
Well, let me see. There's I was going to say no cooking segments, but we have those at Thanksgiving. But we don't talk about Real Housewives of New York or Love Hotel or, those kinds of things. Yesterday we had Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. It's like you have those people. So it forces you to flex a different muscle because obviously a lot of these shows that you talk about, you haven't seen. A lot of these movies that you have movie stars on, haven't even come out yet. You haven't seen. Every now and then you get a trailer. You certainly have the news aspect of it. You're on with mayors, governors, senators, people in the Trump administration. We had Secretary Duffy on, Transportation Secretary, the other day. And so it allows you to flex a different muscle. It's a different type of homework because this is real world homework. Football homework, highly based on opinion. Obviously, you've got numbers that aren't opinion based, but those are pretty standard. Whereas this is you've got to do your homework, especially if you're talking to a politician. You may ask one question and they're going to answer a different question because those are the talking points they have. You need to figure out, okay, how do I bring it back without being rude, or when do I bring it back versus letting it go? So that's a whole different animal. But I've enjoyed doing it. I really have, and part of the reason is because it allows me to do some things that you don't get to do when you're doing play-by-play or when you're hosting a studio show. And also, it's myself and a co-host, so it's two people instead of 5 or 6. And so I think it's easier. I won't say easier. It's different to juggle getting in and having right response and fitting your space in, and maybe having more of an opinion, because that's one thing. When you look at Fox NFL Sunday, to me, it's about the other guys. My job is to facilitate them and set them up. And because, I have not won any Super Bowls versus the 8 that the guys on the set have won. And people want to hear their opinions, not mine. And so that's different versus here. And again, I don't do opinion a lot. I try to stick to facts, but I can make it based off of, I can slide in my opinion based off facts here more so than I can on a football show.
Yeah, it's not even that it's an opinion, more so like, but you do have a much more assertive role on Good Day New York.
Yeah, that's probably a better way to put it. Exactly, Brandon.
Did you see all the attention that your interview with Mayor Eric Adams received a couple months ago?
I couldn't help it, unfortunately. No, I did. Look, my thing is, and I think that it's always been that way with Fox NFL Sunday and everything I've always done. I'm not in it, and I know it sounds weird for, people say you're on TV all the time, every day here, and plus some during football season, but I don't do it for the attention. I do it. I felt that in that case specifically, with that interview that went viral with the mayor, that I heard from everybody all over the country. I'm like, you don't even live in New York, but it went everywhere, was because I felt I had someone who was evading answers. And my job is to get an answer to a question. And so that was what the purpose was. It wasn't a look at me. It wasn't, I'm trying to paint you as a liar. It's, here's the question that a lot of people are asking. You're not answering it. And so I'm going to ask it a different way rather than just let you slide. And so that was my approach with that. But yeah, trust me, I heard from several other politicians outside of New York as well. So it really amazes me sometimes how these things, take on a life of its own. When you consider yourself just doing your job.
What is the commute like during the NFL season? Because obviously the the NFL show is in Los Angeles, and now this show is in New York.
Yeah, so I do Good Day New York during football season, Tuesday through Fridays. I take the Monday off. And on Friday, right after the show, hop a plane, fly out to California, land in LA. And we live in Santa Barbara, my wife. So it's, depending on what time you land, LA traffic, 1.5 to 3 hours commute after that. So I go up, get in on Friday evening, spend Friday night with her. Saturday, head back down to LA, watch college football with Jimmy in the past, or get to the hotel and get up Sunday morning, do the show, leave right after the show on Sunday, and come back to New York, get back here usually about 2 or 3 in the morning with the time difference, Monday morning. Luckily, I'm able to sleep in on Monday morning and then start it all over again.
Yeah, they're fun, exciting jobs, but
Yes.
that's a grueling schedule.
It is, but as you just said, it's fun, exciting. I'm not digging ditches. I'm not saving lives. So I the way I look at it is, someone taught me this saying a long time ago, but instead of saying I have to do something, I get to do something. And that's how I try and approach it. Is like, look, I get to do this. I mean, if I weren't doing this, I would love the opportunity to host Fox NFL Sunday. Or, as the people from Good Day New York came to me 1.5 years ago, I relish this opportunity. So I feel blessed and fortunate to have the burden to have to fly back and forth cross country each and every week to do 2 jobs that I absolutely love, because most people don't even have 1 job that they love. So I don't look at it as a negative. The only hard part is just, again, not trying to be Mr. Sappy or romantic, but I spend so much time away from my wife. Yeah. That's a challenge. I mean, the reason that you marry people is because you like spending time with them in general. So that's been the biggest challenge. But otherwise, from a work standpoint, it's no problem whatsoever.
So what was it about Good Day New York that made you want to take on this type of challenge? Because I mean, you're in your late 50s. That's a point where a lot of other people might start to be thinking about lessening their workload.
Yeah, and also I'm living in Santa Barbara, California, and if you've ever been there, that's where people want to retire. You're working your life to get there, and so it was pretty good. But it was a couple things. One, because as I said earlier, it allows me to flex some muscles that I certainly hadn't in a while, if at all. The other thing is, it sounds weird in this day and age, but I'm a company guy, and Fox approached me and asked me about doing it. And when I was first approached, actually was playing golf in Utah, and it was my wife and another couple, and got the phone call, and I told my wife, you won't believe that they're asking me if I'd be interested in going to New York and doing that. And I go, I'm not doing that. And she goes, well, you already work for them, so hear them out. And 2, you never know what appeals to you once you start a conversation. And so I give my wife credit for it. And so we started talking, and it didn't take long, I won't say for them to sell me, but once they presented the opportunity and told me the way they were thinking about it, it made sense to at least give it a shot, because it's one of those things, as my wife said to me then, you don't want to get to the point where you look back and go, man, I had a shot to do that. I didn't, and I wish I had. You can always go the other way and say, hey, I tried it, didn't work out, didn't like it, or whatever. So I think there was an obligation, because Fox came to me, and I've been blessed and fortunate to work Fox NFL Sunday for 20 years, doing games for 10 years before that. I worked locally here on Fox 5, the New York station, where I do Good Day New York as a sports guy before I went to the network. So there's a loyalty there. And in particular, the person that asked me was the person who hired me when I worked in New York back in the late 90s and early 2000s. So there was an obligation, not an obligation, but a commitment to her and to the company. And when they asked, it kind of opened the doors and said, yeah, I could help them out, but also get to do some of the things that I want to do.
You also did daily sports radio in Dallas earlier in your career, correct?
Yes. The Ticket. I was on the Ticket. The very first day that it existed in 1994. Skip Bayless.
That's what I was just going to ask. I knew Skip Bayless was on there early on. I didn't know if he was your lead-in at that point.
Yep. He did 6 to 9, and I did 9 to 11. So every day. And the first day we rushed on the air in 94. We were supposed to start up and no, this is 30 plus years. So just say March or April or whatever. The Cowboys wound up making it to the Super Bowl that year. And so they rushed, because obviously it makes sense for a sports talk radio show to be on, or station to be on. And they were the first one. I mean, so not like now where there's 3 or 4 in every market. So we rushed to get on the air before the Super Bowl week in Atlanta that year. And it was year 2 of the Bills and Cowboys, but they couldn't get the equipment to work. So the first day that we are on the air, I remember I'm on a payphone in the Media Hotel. This is how old it was. I'm on a payphone in the Media Hotel at the Atlanta Hyatt Regency doing this first talk show. And every 10 seconds, because you're right by the elevator, you're like, ding, ding. And then people would get off and talk and all that kind of stuff. But that was the origin story for the Ticket, which has gone on to become one of the great radio stations in all of America. And not just sports radio.
Did you have much interaction with Skip Bayless back then?
No. I'll be honest with you. I am someone who tends to get along with everybody. Skip Bayless has never been my cup of tea. And so we would pass each other as he was ending his shift and I was beginning mine. We say hello and be cordial. I mean, so it wasn't like that. But we never hung out like I did with everybody else just about at the station. And, at the beginning, it would be people would call me to complain about him. And I'm like, call his show. Don't call him that, And so there was never a great relationship there. So, no.
Yeah. How do you like doing play-by-play for the UFL now?
No, I love that. And again, it goes back to another opportunity, and you go, God, how many things do you do? But I like doing a lot of things in life. I think Howie calls me the most interesting man in the world because a lot of things intrigue me. I did play-by-play for 10 years at the network level before going in the studio, and that's why I continued even for years up until 21. I'd have to do the math, but 20 or 21, doing Seahawks preseason games, because it allowed me to flex that muscle of doing play-by-play, which I enjoy. And even though it's preseason and this is UFL, I just like doing it. I love the immediacy of play-by-play. When you're in a studio, you see things from a 30,000-foot level, where you look at how a win or loss impacts other teams in the playoff picture, or an injury here or there, or a wild play that happened somewhere else. When you're doing play-by-play, you're hyper-focused on your game, and you're worried who the third team left guard is in case there's an injury and he comes in. So you're hyper-focused on that. And so I enjoy that aspect of it. And I always tell people, it's like taking a test. You're only going to use 20% of what you study, but you don't know which 20% you're going to be called on, and you have to have instant recall. There's not time. When you're in the studio, instant recall is good, but if a play happens with 2 minutes left in the half, you can look it up or have a researcher or someone get you the fact in time for halftime. You can't do that when you're doing play-by-play, and I love the immediacy of it.
How has the UFL progressed now in its second season?
I think the quality of football has gotten better, for sure. Yeah. I've been able to I did the XFL in 2020. Well, I did NFL Europe way back when, but that's another story. But I did the XFL in 2020, and then it got shut down by COVID. Then when it came back, the USFL came back for Fox in 22 and 23. I did those, and then doing the UFL last year and this year. And out of the 5 years of spring football I've done, in this recent stretch, this is by far the best quality football. I don't think it's even close. Now, part of it is you had the XFL and USFL, 2 competing leagues with 16 teams. You've cut it down to 8 teams, and so obviously the quality should be better by having half the teams. But I think the quality's gotten better. I think the coaching's gotten better. I think there's still some issues that need to be addressed from a marketing standpoint, from a household recognition standpoint, and I think from a year-round investment, and I don't mean financial investment, but in commitments to some of these cities and some of these stadiums, and making sure that people get to know some of these players that are there. Whether your quarterback is going to be someone who works in the community to get the message out year-round. Those kinds of things I think could be improved. But this is, we're 1.5 years into a brand new league. And so these are growing pains, and I think that they're doing a great job. But the first thing is the football, and I think the football's phenomenally better than anything else I've seen this spring.
Would you say is the UFL should it be considered a success story yet, or is it still working to get there?
I think it's still working to get there. I mean, to be honest, again, we're a year plus. 7 weeks into the second season. So we're a year plus into it, and I think that the final chapter is not written. The final chapter will be written when either this is something that has been around for 4, 5, 6 years, and you've got teams in different markets, and the attendance is good, or it's something that it disappears, which I don't think it will. I honestly don't. In 2 or 3 years, then you go, okay, it's another spring league that did not work. One thing I will say, if this spring league doesn't work, I don't think spring football will ever work. because of the quality of football, because of the commitment between Fox and Redbird. There's a bigger commitment to this than any other spring league. And again, I've seen them all than there's ever been. So if it doesn't work, it can't work. But I genuinely believe this will work. It just needs patience. And we live in a society where everybody wants everything day one to be the same ratings as something else. Well, I can tell you, you look at last year, I know for the complete ratings for last year, it was doing better than the NHL games at 1/10 of the investment from a network standpoint as far as rights fees and those kinds of things go. So I think that's a financial success. And as long as it does that, those things will allow it to keep coming back. So I am a big believer in the future of this league and would love to be a part of it going forward as long as I can.
Yeah, there have been so many spring startups, but it does feel like this is like the last chance for spring football league to be successful. What is the value of spring football?
I think there are many different things. One, just if you love sports like I do. I mean, I travel the world and I watch a cricket match. I barely understand what's going on, but I like the competition of it, and I think a lot of people are like that. Secondly, even if you don't love all sports, if you love football, it gives you a little football fix in the springtime. And I think the opportunity aspect of it can't be overlooked. I think one thing that's different from this versus a lot of other spring leagues or NFL Europe, where everybody was looking to get back in the NFL. I think, everybody would love to get back in the NFL, but you got some guys that are 27, 28 years old, and their last real chance was probably 2 or 3 years ago, but they realized they could make a good life and still be a professional football player doing it at this level. And that's what I talk about, maybe making some investments in those types of guys within the communities that they're in, Birmingham year-round or Memphis year-round, so that fans get to know them. And so I think that is one of the things that's definitely different about it.
How involved is The Rock?
I think that he's been involved behind the scenes. I don't know if he's been in front of the camera as much as a lot of people had expected. And I wonder if that's not part of what, from a fan base, the recognition may be lost. Because I think a lot of people know The Rock owns a league, but is this the league he owns, or is that something else? So it's been one of those things, but obviously he's a busy guy. And so it's hard to kind of pin him down, but I expect we'll see him some, especially as we get in the playoffs and to the championship game. At least I'm guessing.
Yeah, I do think that is one way to help promote the league, like you were saying earlier. One of the things the league could be marketed a little bit better, and you would imagine that the Rock could play a bigger role.
Wouldn't hurt.
That. Yeah,
wouldn't hurt.
You mentioned doing the XFL that got shut down right before COVID. You were doing games with Greg Olson at that point, correct?
Well, no, I was Joel Klatt and I were still doing games. But what would happen is, you have those weeks where you do 2 games. And so if I did a second game, it would be with Greg Olson. Okay. But it was always Klatt and me. It
was Klatt back then too. Did you see star quality in Greg at that point?
Yeah. I can tell you, I mean, I knew Greg a little bit when he was a player, but not really. And it was 2 years in a row, but the first year he did a game while he was still playing on his bye week. I remember watching and I was like, wow, this guy's got potential. Now, did I think at that point, after one game, he could be a number 1 or 2 guy? Who knows? But you knew he had something. And that second year when he came back and did it, like the light, at least for me, went off. You're like, okay, this guy gets it. He's only done 1 game and he's already learned what his mistakes were from that one and how to improve. And then working with him doing the XFL, I saw the homework that he put into it. And especially, I mean, look, you've been around, you know how it is. A lot of guys who are ex-athletes don't believe in doing a lot of homework because they think they can just show up and talk. He wasn't even an ex-athlete then. He was still playing, yet he was doing the work and probably doing a lot more than a lot of other guys who were doing it. So I saw that work ethic coupled with the ability that you could see on air right away, and you knew that he had potential to be something special.
Do you have any interest in calling NFL games again?
I would call NFL games if I didn't have to give up the studio.
Okay.
It's one of those things that, and I am not a believer in talking about jobs that someone else has, but say they started a Tuesday night football and Fox had Tuesday night football, I would love to say, okay, you're in the studio on Sunday and you can do games on Tuesday night. So I love the immediacy of the play-by-play, but I would never, ever give up the opportunity to be in the studio, because that to me is kind of my dream gig right now. I mean, it really is. You know, when I was a kid, I was a nerd and I watched Brett Musburger and the CBS pregame show and the NFL Today and all that kind of stuff, and just always thought, and I never thought about being in television. I just loved watching it because I love the entertainment aspect of it. And now I get to be on the other side and hopefully make a kid smile somewhere. So I would not give this up.
Curt, you were great. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. Really appreciate it.
That's it. Can I be number 100 too? We'll do this next week.
Yeah, would love it.
Thank you, Brandon. Anytime.
Thank you. That is Curt Menefee. I'm Brandon Contes. This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Please rate and subscribe to this podcast. Please also subscribe to Awful Announcing's YouTube page. But regardless of how you consume Awful Announcing and the Awful Announcing Podcast, thanks for listening and be good.
Thanks for listening to the Awful Announcing Podcast. For the latest news spanning the sports media landscape and more, check out awfulannouncing.com and follow us at Awful Announcing.